To me, it's amazing when somebody gets away with murder, but how about when somebody gets away with murder repeatedly, leaves a trail of death and destruction, and still ends up like a legend today, renowned and well respected by some people here in Vegas, and reviled and hated by others. Stay tuned, guys. We're going to talk about the life of Benny Binion of Binion's Casino in Horseshoe, the guy who proved you can get away with murder time and time and time again, because in life, who you know sometimes is more important than what you have or what you can do. Stay tuned. Welcome in. If you're not subscribed, please take a second and hit the subscribe button and the bell for all notifications. I'd love to cover so many different things on YouTube, and one of them is historic true crime. And Benny Binion, to me, the erstwhile owner of Binion's Horseshoe Casino, passed away years ago, of course. But his story is remarkable because evidently he's a guy that got away with murder not one time, several times. And the only time he ever spent in jail was for tax fraud in Texas. It's an incredible story. It's a story of bombings, revenge, family misery passed along in generations. It's a very hard story to tell, but it's a story of a guy come out of Texas, unable to even read, makes an enormous success of himself in Las Vegas, and well, through murder, mayhem, rises to the top, only to see his fortunes fail in the end, and his family end up pretty much in abject misery. But the Horseshoe lives on today. Let's tell some of Benny Binion's story. Beautiful day in Vegas. No one had ever heard of Benny Binion before, born and raised in Texas. But in the 1930s, he became quite adept at running what we call the rackets and having influence over gambling and other activities that were illegal at that time. And definitely had an interest in poker, which carried through until the time of his death. But the important point for us is he arrived in Las Vegas in 1946 with 2 suitcases full of cash as a result of his endeavors in Texas. And he was able to buy a small place, lease a small place, had partial interest in the land. And he started a casino called Binion's Horseshoe, which still remains today in the same location. You may know it famed for where the World Series of Poker came about and started in the 1970s. Famous characters such as Doyle Brunson and Amarillo Slim, some of the most legendary card players of all time, found a home there at Binion's. And Binion's had a couple philosophies. Benny Binion had a couple ideas that ruled his business plan, I would say, in the beginning in the 1940s and into the 50s. That was, number one, he would be the only casino that would book any size bet. It didn't matter if you came in with $1 million in your suitcase or whatever, Benny Binion would book that bet. Other casinos would be afraid of financial, but he became known as Bet 'em Up Benny. The other thing, his other philosophy was make a small person feel big. And he would have good cheap eats. He didn't believe in real high-end hotel rooms. It was a sawdust joint, and people loved it, and he really flourished. But he developed enemies, one who actually tried to strap 2 bombs onto his airplane, private plane, and bombed Benny Binion's house. That's a hell of a story. I should also mention 2 other things important to Benny Binion. The first one being, he was the first casino owner in Las Vegas that adopted the policy of, if you find a cheater, break their arms, break their legs, leave such an impression on them that it's not something they'll ever try on a Binion's property again. He's the one that pioneered it. He also believed, do unto others before they do unto you, and always adopt the Texas philosophy of carry 3 pistols wherever you go. We're talking about a very colorful guy, starting as an errand boy in Texas, uneducated, and just rising to start a casino and staying on the good side of local authorities. But let's get to this notorious almost airplane bombing that occurred many years ago. The first guy that ran afoul of Binion was a guy who had the nickname Cat Noble, because evidently he had 9 lives and could seem to escape anything. But Cat Noble was a thorn, unknown to me why he was, but he was a guy that really stuck in Binion's crawl. And Binion, in a typical Benny Binion way, hit your enemy before they hit you, and he decided to try to take out Cat Noble. This guy was off the chain. I had forgotten to mention that Cat Noble was in Texas, and he was a big rival of Binion, and Binion had tried several times. He had hitmen in running and driving in cars and opening fire and having running gun battles with Noble, trying to wipe him out on the highways of Texas. And finally in 1949, Benny Binion had had enough. And for what authorities believe was the first of many times in the would-be in the future, Noble's wife came out to her car one morning and it erupted in an explosion, and she was killed, and that lit a fuse under Cat Noble. Meanwhile, it was the late 1940s and Benny was in Texas, but Noble never forgot, was in Las Vegas, but Noble never forgot what Benny Binion had done to him. He was the guy that had opportunity, money, and motive to take him out. First thing Noble did was hire a hitman called the Grocery Man. Isn't it amazing the names that these guys have? But the Grocery Man ended up double-crossing Noble, and he was paid off by the other side once Binion's guys got news of the fact that there was a planned hit on him. They paid the Grocery Man even more, and one morning when Noble, he was in a deep state of depression after losing his wife, came out of his home one morning, and very early in the morning, and he was blinded by headlights that were turned on in front of his home, and somebody opened fire with submachine guns. Amazingly, Cat Noble, using another one of his 9 lives, had survived this attempt on his life. Cat Noble decided, I've had enough of this guy, and he was an accomplished small plane pilot, and he began to formulate a plan that would take him 1,000 miles northwest towards the city of Las Vegas. And he decided, since Benny Binion's compound was so heavily fortified and protected here in Las Vegas, that he was going to do something that no gangster, no mob guy had ever done before. He was going to fit his private plane up with 2 bombs. Somehow he got a hold of 2 bombs, and he put them on the rails fitted to the bottom of his plane, and he made a couple dry runs. Unfortunately for him, the day he was going to set his plan in motion, a FBI agent showed up at the airfield, and Cat Noble broke down in tears and cried to the FBI agent that Benny Binion gets all the breaks in life. Well, it seemed to be, because once again, one of the wildest plots to take out a big shot in Vegas had failed again. It's a nice view of Metro lockup jail downtown. You want to make sure you never end up there. Sadly, in August of 1959, Cat Noble's last life was to run out as he was parked by the mailbox in front of his house. A huge explosion ripped through his vehicle, killing him instantly, and, well, taking out one of Benny Binion's thorns in the side in the usual dramatic way. Of course, nothing was ever pinned on anybody. It never seemed that they were. These bombings were a feature in Las Vegas. I've done previous stories about trying to force the commercial workers union here to be unionized, and trying to blow up the Alpine restaurant. Just a crazy string of bombings here, of which pretty sure Benny Binion was involved in a lot of them, but we're not done yet. Now, Benny Binion had problems of his own stemming back to his time with in Dallas and in Texas, where they finally nailed him for tax evasion, and he was sentenced to like over 4 years in prison. As a result of that, you're not allowed to have a gambling license in Las Vegas unless you have a spotless record. Think of the movie Casino and things, and what Lefty Rosenthal, played by Robert De Niro, was trying to go through to get his license and things. It's a very tightly controlled thing, and if you have a blemish on your record, or you associate with guys that are known mob people, there's no chance that you're going to get a license. So the property's license had to be transferred to his wife and a couple other relatives, and things were relatively peaceful in the 1950s. But we fast forward to the 1970s, and, well, Benny Binion had another huge problem. There was a former FBI agent who came here in the 1930s. He was one of the first federal law enforcement people to come into Las Vegas, and he managed to do pretty well here himself. His name was Coltrane, and he and his family, his wife was very wealthy. He married a gal that had significant assets, and unfortunately and sadly for him, she passed away. But left him in a position where he was able to acquire some real estate. And since Benny Binion never really owned the land underneath of Binion's casino, yes, it's true, one of those loose ends that comes up and trips you, Coltrane owned 37.5% of the land that the casino sat on. And being a former FBI agent, when the time for renewal came up for the license, for the renewal, not the license, but the lease to be renewed, well, Coltrane did not like the fact that Benny Binion was a unconvicted murderer and a lowlife. And he sort of had it in his head that he wanted to see Las Vegas become a better place and shake off these mob influence, mob ties, all this mob history. So he told Benny Binion, no dice, man, I'm not renewing your lease for the land. And that was something that was to cause him, Coltrane, to lose his life in another one of the most notorious bombings in Las Vegas history. People that knew Binion said, oh, he tried to negotiate, he did his best, but according to him, I tried to negotiate in good faith, but the son of a bitch wouldn't budge 1 inch. And by spring of 1972, as I mentioned, Binion became frustrated, and I'm now making my way down to what used to be formerly known as the Bank of Nevada building, that is now a building, I believe, that's owned by the city or the county. We're going up to it now. This is known as the Bridger building, but back in 1972, on that fateful July day, it was known as the Bank of Nevada. And it's a place that Colt Hard had his office, a former FBI agent. And unbeknownst to him on that day, the Hanley father and son bomber team made their way into the parking garage here and, carefully taking their time, determined which of the vehicles belonged to Colt Hard, and they strapped a bomb to it, which blew a huge hole in the side of the building here, and resulted in the immediate death of the longtime nemesis who would not negotiate a renewal lease. You can imagine, with a decent guy like Colt Hard now dead, Las Vegas was rocked to its core. I mean, bombings in the 1970s had become such a problematic thing, and this was one of the good guys that got taken out by a bomb. So the Chamber of Commerce immediately raised $75,000 as a reward, and investigations began. But Sheriff Lamb, unknown to a lot of people at that time, was a very great friend of Benny Binion, and later he would face federal charges for corruption here in Las Vegas, and he did a lot to thwart the investigation. So believe it or not, no charges were ever, there were charges filed, but the prosecution never continued forward with the case. They thought they had enough, but for some reason or another, probably through the interventions of Sheriff Lamb, it never came to fruition, and Benny Binion, the bombing killer, murderer, was once again smiling, because now negotiations on renewing a lease could at least continue with a new party. The one son that Benny Binion had that he sort of vested, they called him a mini Benny, was Ted Binion, and he died of drug addiction, and they think, well, it was a very problematic family. But by 2004, control of Binions had passed from the Binion family. Now, he had another son called Benny Binion Jr. No, excuse me, his name was Jack Binion. Jack's the one that really launched the poker, World Series of Poker. In the early years, drawing some of the greatest players, he tried to also clean up the reputation of Binion's and turn it into a much more upstanding joint. I think the philosophy of that time was you didn't have to cheat people to make good money. Running a casino, maybe Benny Binion in the early days didn't appreciate how the edge cuts everybody down eventually when it comes to gambling. So Jack Binion decided to try to run a decent house, and by and large, he did a good job. Benny Binion eventually passed away, I think in 1989, of heart failure. Stories of him burying tons of silver out in the desert. There's still people that to this day go out there searching, convinced that Benny hid tons of silver out there. He had a wonderful silver dollar collection that eventually was broken up and sold, and some of those coins were marked as part of the Binion estate with a little more history associated with them. But what a cool story of a killer who repeatedly got away with murder. Hey, if you enjoyed this story, please give a like, subscribe down below, and share out. I love these stories of Vegas and true crime, and I'm just amazed how some people were able to get away with murder in this town. I guess it was all a matter of who you know. Thanks for watching, guys, and thumbs up are appreciated.
You're such an awesome sport. It's all about positivity. Thank you. God bless you guys. We do parties, weddings, and divorces. God bless y'all. Peace.